Okay, folks, so welcome to the channel again. This video is about a review of Apple financial statements. And as always, there's typically three key financial statements that we always want to look at. There's the statement of changes in equity, which shows the change in ownership. There is the statement of profit and loss and comprehensive income, which shows the changes in, well, profit and loss. And that's why sometimes it's actually called the profit and loss statement. So I have them up on my screen here, and that's what I'm looking at. And then the last one is called the balance sheet, or the statement of profit and statement of financial position. That changed a few years ago. Okay, so the process, as always, we usually start with the statement of financial position or the balance sheet. It depends, whatever you want to call it. It does depend what generation you come from, but really, at the end of the day, it's the same thing. And the whole goal is to provide users with an enhanced understanding of the financial statements, how the company is performing, and that sort of thing. So with this annual report analysis, as explained, we'll be looking at the Apple financials. I'm taking notes as I'm taking you through. And this can be found on their website. Super helpful. There's a lot of information in there. And I think that the primary reason behind this is transparency, right? It's important these are publicly listed entities, and the public just has to understand, what's going on with the financials. And so this is why they created these statements and made them publicly available. A few of the things that are publicly available, there is information related to things like correspondence with like regulators and that sort of thing. Again, it's for transparency purposes. These are public companies, and it's it is important that they are there is an air of transparency about them. And one of the things that helps is, this stuff being publicly accessible by the stakeholders, the different stakeholders within the community, and that sort of thing. And so I think that we should dig, excuse me, I think that we should dig right in. But just before we do, actually, let's go right for it. As explained, it's important to understand, look who the directors are. And you can find that in the first few pages of the annual report. And then it's helpful to see if headquarters has changed, where the new location of the entity is. It's helpful. It's not mandatory or anything. It's just, I'm a bit of a data geek, so I like to understand how data changes over time. So for example, if the entity moved, why did they move? Is, one jurisdiction favorable over the other? And there's a few reasons here. It could be anything from tax reasons, right? So they might have changed jurisdictions for tax purposes. or for some other reason, really. But until you look at the data, the annual report, you never know. Sometimes they do explain in these annual reports why they shifted or made this change or this movement. Sometimes they don't, right? They are not mandated to disclose anything that that they might not deem as being necessary. Yeah, it's incredibly necessary. So, okay, so let's just go through the process again of creating our folders. So everything is nice and organized again. As I'm talking through this with you, taking some detailed notes on the computer, detailed notes on the side, just so we're, again, for reference later. It also makes it easy to explain to other people, because you have like a running summary of the information you just captured. Okay, the more of these you do, you start to see patterns. They are American companies. Mm. One of the things that the accounting standards try to do is to essentially bring reporting closer together, right? So things are much more consistent, cleaner, and that sort of thing, which is what we're seeing here. Okay. I like to skip right to the financial statements. Again, top 3 financial statements that we like to look at is statement of financial position, and then we jump into the statement of comprehensive income, profit and loss comprehensive income. The comprehensive income bit comes under the loss or the profit for the year, whatever the the case is for the specific entity. And then after that, you have the statement of changes in equity, which shows stuff related to shareholders like dividends, the profits for the year, the inception to date profits, which is essentially the profits or losses from netted off from every year since the entity was established. I do like to do different reviews. Again, when you look at an entity from year to year, you do see some patterns. Excuse me. But sometimes it is helpful to look across 3 or 4 different years where you start to see more clear patterns. And so that's what I'm doing now. I'm looking through the set of financial statements to understand what's going on. So again, starting with that statement of financial position or the balance sheet, which has all the good stuff. Jumping into the assets, scrolling down the balance sheet, looking through the significant things are usually pretty clear. And so that's kind of what I'm looking at here. Okay. I'm happy so far. Look, so, and then the next thing we move on to is analysis of the financials. And that's important to understand how the numbers trended, how the company is performing in comparison to the previous year. And you know how they say, if you understand where the past, you can predict the future. And this is exactly what this is. And so you start off by looking at the assets, and you jump to the liabilities. Um, liabilities are usually tied to the reserves and that sort of thing. So you can look at the liabilities and the different categories. Sometimes it could be mining reserves or some other sort of provisions that drive things. And it's important to understand how they're calculated. Sometimes they are estimates as, determined by different experts. But it's hard, right? Like, for example, in a mine, how do you tell how much gold reserves a company has? I don't think you can do it with absolute certainty. That's for sure. But they are estimates, and they tend to be pretty good ones too. You have some really good actuaries that determine these things. Another really good source of information is the notes. So by analyzing the notes and the different movements, you can get to understand the different changes. That you otherwise wouldn't be able to see, for example. In other areas. The notes do tend generally to explain movements really well. Okay, we continue. I'm taking notes as we go. One thing that people tend to not pay attention to is also dates, right? Like when certain things happen, people tend to pay attention to what happened, not so much when it happened. And so dates is another thing you want to look at. And there's different things we could look at with the dates. And we could go back as far back as whenever, but we generally tend to want to look at the last 1 or 2 years for any significant dates. to see if there's anything that we want to, um, incorporate. More often than not, there tends to be nothing. The dates are pretty standard. Everything is annualized. Sometimes you have entities with March year ends. Another important thing is analyzing the correspondence with different stakeholders. And we look at the different things that are required by the regulators. There's a statement that falls often overlooked, which is statement of changes in equity, which has things like dividends declared and that sort of thing. It's important to analyze that too as you analyze the rest of the statements. Again, sometimes there isn't too many changes in shareholders or that sort of thing, so it often doesn't really matter. I'm just comparing if there's been any um, new investments by the company. That's important for understanding the company's growth strategy. It's often really, really important to incorporate some of the items that the entity is meant to sort of comply with and that sort of thing. And the way that you do it is you analyze the financial report in its entirety. continuing with the theme of looking at the financial statements, again, we need to analyze sometimes the non-financial aspects of the financial statements.